a full moon behind us, and we're going to do a Bigfoot story. 11th August 2025, and looking like a crazy old man. Alright, so I had a very nice exchange with another YouTuber that we kind of been acknowledging each other's work from time to time and commenting on each other's shows. Raven. She's got a small channel, but she does very interesting work tracking the anomalies that various public access feeds, observatory, nature observatory, astronomical, sun, solar astronomy, and so she does some pretty interesting stuff. And this topic, she came up about trees being found on a hiking trails or in remote locations. In this case, I think it was either Washington State or Oregon or Northern California, out that part of the world. And she kind of reposted a very interesting video of a couple who found a tree that was torn from the forest somehow. The girth of this thing was huge. I mean, really big, and it was driven into the ground as if in one motion. All right, there was no debris, no digging, no preparation, and the tree was upside down. All right, so these are like fence posts with branches and all, just sort of haphazardly broken off, like a fence post driven into the ground. You follow what I mean? But the scale of it, the 6 foot tall fellow was her husband, I assume husband or boyfriend, was climbing the branches of it, and you could really appreciate, okay, this isn't small. This is a really big tree that this couple found. And and the question was posed by Raven, what did this? Has anybody heard of this before? And so I saw other commentary about Bigfoot, and one fellow was kind of not really kind about it, and the subject of Bigfoot. He didn't want her talking about it, but it doesn't matter. So in our comments in YouTube, you can comment on people's programs, and I made mention that Steve Isdall, How to Hunt, or the Facts by How to Hunt. His channel is off the rails with viewers at this point. Really fantastic. And what he started doing 5 years ago or thereabouts is at the request of some of his viewers. Then they wanted to know if he ever saw anything strange in the woods, and he didn't really want to talk about it, but he opened up the can of worms of what he experienced, or at least one of his experiences, dealing with a large, hairy, bipedal creature that was very man-like, in the neighborhood of 8 to 10 feet tall or so. So I referenced it and mentioned to Raven, check out his channel. It's a great channel and really worth investigating. Okay, all right. And so we had a little back and forth, and she goes, "Well, what about you, George? Do you have any stories?" And I mentioned that. Well, yeah, actually, I wrote in and gave one of my accounts to Steve's site. It's share my story at howtohunt, I think .com, something like that. So I put my story in, and he read it out on the air, along with thousands at this point of other people. Really, really remarkable turnout that he's gotten. and it's every day. He gets hundreds of emails in a day sometimes, all over the world, and now he's made it his mission to read them. And I mean, he's posting 2 and 3 times a day almost, and he works, and he has horses, his family life, and his dogs and chickens and horses and fishing and hunt. He's a professional hunting guide and many other talents. I'm really impressed at his professionalism and his ability to just knock these shows out every day. And he's made a commitment, and he's by hook or by crook, he's going to read everybody's story until he reads them all. Okay, so that's Steve, and then I finished my thought with Raven in my comment. I said, you know what? I'll do it. I'll tell my story, and I'll put it on my channel, and I'll shout out to Raven. Here it comes. So this is my story, and it starts in Pearl River, New York, 1971-ish. I was about 11 years old, and we had this great location to grow up. Pearl River in general is still. I'm still in contact with many lovely people that I grew up with and went to school with, and so we had, some wooded areas. And one of the unique locations where I was very close to this farm stand called Van Houten's, and next to a reservoir called Lake Tappan, and it was part of the Hackensack Water Company's reservoir, and that serviced a good portion of, I guess, drinking water and perhaps industrial supply of water. But it was a great place to go fishing, and it was a very magical place. And I have a lot of stories about some discoveries I made there when they were still dredging the earth away and redirecting the original riverbed of the that part of the Hackensack River. Actually goes through that corner of Rockland County, New York. And so we had the water company acreage, which was probably thousands of acres if you add it all up along the river, where they had their, I guess you would say watershed, yeah. And then there would be undeveloped land, farms that had reforested, that had gone defunct over the centuries, and then you had dense suburbs to the south in New Jersey and surrounds of the rest of our county. But where we were next to the reservoir, where Mom and Dad bought their second or third house in Pearl River, we had this Fresh Air Fund campsite. It was a long-established campsite called Henry Kaufman Campgrounds. Now they had, I think, 1,000 acres, and then adjacent to that was just west of our property, which was on Sickletown Road, very close to the Van Houten Farms, and then right behind the Van Houten Farm stand and their horse field and greenhouses and such. You had the reservoir, all right, and then that's to my east, and then to my west would be Henry Kaufman Campgrounds, which is right on our property line, right up against it. And then going to the north, adjacent to the campground, was another 2,000 acres of state land that then ran into the watershed lands of the reservoir further up the road. All right, so now you got a good picture of a fair amount of acreage. I mean, some thousands of acres of forested area that had water supply and really good fishing back in the day, and deer, plenty of deer in those woods. Had many encounters with wildlife there, and all of this very close to New York City. Only 15, 16 miles from Manhattan. not very far from Manhattan. Mind-boggling, right? But there you go. You know, the city ends and the country begins. And on this particular summer day, my neighbor, who was Steve, and I haven't seen him in many years. So it was Steve Alter, and their family had moved in recently from that point of view, uh, from California, and so I made fast friends with the whole family and Abby and I think their youngest sister was I forget her name, could have been Laura, but I don't know. And but I remember Gabby quite well, and I'm friends with her on Facebook again after many years. Anyway, so Steve was older than me, so I'm 11 years old, and I would say Steve was about 14 or 15. And there's a big difference, between 11 and 14. He was adult sized young man, and I was a big for 11 years old. I was a big kid. I was 5'6" or 7 or 8 by then already. I think when I was 13, I hit 6 foot tall at the age of 13. Anyway, so there you go. Steve says to me one day, it was a like now, late summer day, the cicadas and crickets are going, and it's nothing to do, right? Let's do something. And so Steve gets the idea, let's go behind my house where his property sort of ended, the forest began, and then tucked to the side of a wedge of forest was my house and property. So for me to go down to his house, I just cut through the woods or skirted the woods, and we had Ken McGay's was in front of my house, and then there was the street, and then next to the McGay's was the altars. So that's a little triangle there, and so we go. All right, so we walk back into his uh, part of the woods, and there was a notable little trail, but I didn't think anything of it. But what I did think was odd is when you see little trails like this, there's almost always, invariably, footprints of deer, right? And I didn't see any of that, and I remember to this day that was pretty odd, right? Okay, all right, so it's just a trail. So well, I didn't know who it was. It wasn't a person trail, so it seemed, right? And also on this hill, really nice little hill of a spot, small hill, there was this uh, like a grassy area, and the thicket was around it, but not in there, right on this little lovely little hill. And at the bottom of this rise, because they can't call it a hill, it was just a roll in the land, And there was this little flowing spring of a little spit of water down at the bottom of it. So I thought that was kind of neat. Hadn't noticed that before. But what was interesting is I noticed, it looks like a lay for deer, because sometimes deer will bed down in a little comfortable spot that's protected like that. And but then, that's where but I don't see any prints. Where's their tracks? All right, being teenagers and as boys will be, we just get right to whatever idea we cooked up, and at this point, we decided to build a platform to sleep out on, and we built it about five. There was these four trees that were, big enough to be supportive, but not too big you couldn't lash onto it. So we ended up fashioning a whole. I mean, we cut a lot of saplings down, and it didn't really hit the forest that hard. That's how thick this new growth was. So it must have been logged out, sometime before then, and it was just full of these saplings. And we we got every scrap of rope we could find, you know, a clothesline. I mean, we scavenged around his place and my house, and we came up with enough to lash a real, actually a very cool little platform. You know, it was about 6 feet up, not too high, but you know, we fashioned a little, you know, lashed together a ladder, you know, and if you have a hatchet and rope, you can accomplish a lot. Let me tell you, all right. And we were quite industrious, and so it was getting later and later. I mean, we were at it all day. I mean, we actually, you know, we took our time and made a nice little structure. And so we were sitting on it, and Steve goes, "Yeah, let's camp out tonight." And I said, "Okay, but I got to ask my dad first." Okay. So Steve goes, "I'm going to go get my bed and roll, and I'll meet you back here." And I said, "Okay, I'm gonna go ask Dad for permission and get my sleeping bag." So I go back to my house, and I find Dad, I guess, monkeying around in the kitchen, maybe getting dinner to put together. A couple of my brothers were home watching football or something. And I asked him, I said, "Dad, you know, me and Steve made a a little platform to camp out on. You know, is it okay if I sleep outside tonight with, you know, in the back in the woods right here?" And Dad goes, "Well, I'm going to have to inspect your work, son. You know, so let me see what you did." And so Dad follows me out to the woods. You know, I had presence of mind to grab my sleeping bag, and Dad's with me, and he gets out to our little fort, and he gives it a good military inspection, you know. And you know, he goes, you boys really put some effort into this. This is impressive. Good work, lads. You know." And he said, "Sure, you can, you know, yeah, you can stay out. You can camp out. You guys can, you know, spend the night out here. Sure, no problem." So Dad makes his way back to the house, and I think Steve kind of made his way up to the trail at that point, and so we're, you know, we didn't even, you know, set up, you know, our sleeping arrangements or anything. We're just sort of hanging out with our feet dangling over the edge of, you know, one of the stronger edges. You know, you could. So I remember poles going this way were bigger than the poles going this way, right? So we were dangling our legs over the strong part, and just sort of appreciating um, the sounds, the forest, and dusk was setting in. That magical time, right? And we got quiet, and everything gets quiet. And then Steve sort of leans over to me, and I'm sort of like leaning over to him, and we're going, at the same time, we both say, "Do you feel that?" And then I said, "Yeah." And then he says, "Let's get out of here." So we both jump at the same time and land on the ground on our feet. You know, sort of just hop off from a sitting position, right? We land, and then we start walking that, you know, that little trail back to his yard. And he's just like a step ahead of me, not far, right? Real close. And then right at that moment, we're still quite close to the fort, to the platform. I hear this god awful, blood curdling scream that it shook my chest. It pushed me from behind. The force of this bellow, this scream, this very, very angry, unhappy sound, right? And as that scream unloaded on my head and being, I'm hearing thump, thump, thump right behind me. Something's charging us on two legs. Okay? And Steve just bolts, right? Now he's bigger and stronger than me by a lot. And I'm like, and I remember thinking to myself, you're not leaving me back here. And I take two fingers like this and I grab onto his belt. And so now, like I'm still running, but he's dragging me at the same time. And and my footballs, I'm pushing off, and so the two of us are sailing out of those woods, and I'm hearing thump 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 behind me, and then I'm feeling this on the back of my shirt, right on my tail. My shirt tail's being pulled by something. Thump thump thump. The scream stopped. That initial scream stopped when the thumping running started. I did kind of feel that. When we got into his yard, we made it all the way to his back door, and we kind of stopped. It was a short run, so we weren't really out of breath, but we were certainly jacked up. The adrenaline was nuts. And so we're looking at the wood line, and we're scanning it. Nothing there. And we're looking at each other like we never spoke of it again. And this is a phenomenon. This is a real phenomenon. I just said, I got to go home. And he didn't. He said, yeah, sure, something like that, And so he goes into his house, and now I have to go and skirt the woods and make it to my house. So I get to my house, and there's a part of me that's like, my brothers, they're rotten. All right, typical 60s, 1950s, 60s jock kind of mentality. I was the youngest. I had 7 athletic older brothers, and they were watching football in what we called the den, and that corner of the house was actually on the side where I was camped out. And I kind of barrel my way into the house, and now I'm like really angry and scared and full of adrenaline, wide-eyed. And so I started interrogating my brothers. I think there was Roger and Ray and John were home. I don't think Rob was always working, so I doubt Robbie was there. And Jim and Joe were off in university or military. Right? So those were my brothers that were there, and they're looking at me like I'm nuts. Like what is wrong with you? And I was accusing them of doing another prank on me, because that was a favorite pastime, was to prank on George. And I'm railing on them, and I'm saying, what's the matter with you guys? Were you just out there? Did you guys just scare the shit out of me and Steve? And I'm sizing them up. I'm looking them over, and okay, no, nobody's breathing hard. They're all completely relaxed watching a football game. It's not highly likely, that they just pulled some stunt on me and they could get this, together that quickly, and then have this, quiet, peaceful tone in the house. The energy wasn't like, if they were pranking me, you would have felt it. I would have felt it. I know I would have. I was used to it. So I already knew that they didn't have anything to do it, but I just had to say it because I was telling my story. I told them what happened. And then they started thinking I was pulling a fast one on them. And then I start getting the third degree from them. Yeah, okay, you're pulling our leg. What do you mean? What's going on out here? And I said, no, I'm not fooling. And that's kind of where that ended. But that's not the end of the whole. See, it's a kind of a two-part story, because a few weeks later, I let it go, wasn't thinking about it, and older brothers being significantly older and having lots of fun things to do that don't include me. And my sister was, I remember very, very clearly, my sister was studying a lot because she was trying to graduate high school a year early and get into a advanced um, nursing school. Did she go to, I think it was Pace University, maybe? I can't remember. It was right across the river, the Hudson River. And anyway, so Mary was studying in her room, and we have a second story uh, porch roof that ran all along the front. So we had a kind of a shallow porch that was great for sitting on and just, looking at the limited view, but you could see a little bit of the lake, and we had Ken McGeeh's house, and then the forest was just there, or three sides of us. So it was really nice to hang out, and it was a nice little porch, and that porch had a roof that was right under the bedroom windows, by about that much, I don't know, maybe that much from the edge of the roof line to the bottom of the windowsill, right? Kind of like that. And going into the front of the house, we had a kind of the grand stairway, I used to think of it, but it was, entryway. You had a living room to the right, and you had a formal dining room to the left, and then the staircase went straight up, and next to the staircase was a hallway that went to the back of the house where the den was, sort of opposite on the other side of the wall from that right side living room, right? So that's kind of how the house was set up. And I just, I amble up the stairs, and at the top of the stairs, I made the left to my bedroom, and to go to my sister's bedroom was to the right. So she had the next bedroom after the stairwell. And then there was another bedroom at the end, which was my brother Ray's, and John had the room next to Ray's, which was on the northwest corner. And Roger and I shared a room that was more or less the southeast corner. All right, so that's the setup. And Mary was diligently studying away in her room, and nobody else was home. Dad and Mom were at some function, apparently. And so it's just me and Mary, right? So that's a big house. It's kind of low, spooky in a way, but it was fairly modern. It was built in the '60s, so it was new. It had a lot of new features. And I get into my bedroom. I open my bedroom door, click on the light, and the most curious thing was going on. There was those little ashtrays. My brother Roger had an ashtray that was they were tin, and they had 4 indents for cigarettes. And very light, but they were everywhere. They're very common. I think you can even find them still. You still see them. Restaurants used to have them and things like that. It was or bars maybe. But anyway, so this little tin ashtray was just vibrating like that on his dresser, which was next to the window. Well, and the thing is that the sound of the tin was one sound, but there was another sound, which was the window frame itself was being shaken. And that's when I saw him. And so I see a face kind of looking down like this with hands, and I just really saw fingers. I could see hair on top of the fingers. I could see like palms that were not hairy, and kind of trying to shake. He was shaking the whole frame of the window, as if trying to figure out how to open it, or not sure what he was up to. But then, the light goes on and it startles him, and so it all happened very quickly, but it was all very clear, and the light got and shone on his face, and what I saw two real big eyes, very dark. The pupils must have been very dilated, but I imagine they were dark brown eyes, perhaps. And this part, his forehead, his cheeks. I keep saying he. I don't know if it was a he. Um, and this part of the face didn't have hair, but then the hair came in very quickly all around, and I could see that there was hair on his arms, and the chest area at this point was obscured by the windowsill. I guess he was sort of like, he was big, crouched over, and I mean I just lose my shit. I mean I just and so I screamed. And I made it down those steps to the kitchen. Why the kitchen would be any safer than any other place, I don't know, but that's where I went. It's like 14 steps. I went down those steps in 2 steps. I jumped down, and it's amazing. When I reminisce about this, and I think, I was superhuman in that moment. For an 11-year-old kid. But my sister, she heard something different. She heard what I heard in the woods, something bipedal running across past her window. Thump, 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 about 4 or 5, maybe 6 steps. All right, this is a big house. It's like maybe a footprint of 40 by 60. A good sized house. I think they called it. It wasn't a ranch. Maybe it was split level. No, it wasn't split level. It was just a big house. Just a big house. And then she screams and comes down behind me. Right? So the two of us find each other, within nanoseconds of each other in the kitchen, absolutely freaked out. We were absolutely freaked out. And we ended up calling the cops, and the cops show up. One gentleman actually came in the house, and they were taking us serious. There was no, they were genuinely kind of not surprised. Or maybe they were just being professional, but they didn't make any bad comments, and they couldn't find anything. We told them my sister heard it thump on the ground when he landed. They go out there, nothing, no tracks. And this is consistent with thousands and thousands of stories. And this all happened, in suburban New York, 15, 20 miles from Manhattan, 1971. So, my takeaway is you don't have to be in some super remote place. These creatures go wherever they want. There's nothing to stop them. Anyway, that's my story, and I've got lots of others. Rockland County, anybody, any of my peeps that are, watching, I'll do a show with you. If you got some high strangeness in Rockland County, I'm a fan of it. I want to hear about it. I think we should hear about it. I think we should talk about these things. All right. Over and out for now. Let's see how this goes. All right. Everybody, be well. Have a great rest of your evening and work week. All right. Bye now.